Welcome to Raised on D&D podcast. Twice a month, Raised on D&D brings you inspirational interviews, tips, and strategies to enhance your family's gaming experience. Your host for Raised on D&D has been a game master for 30 years and father to 3 gamers. Here is Nick Cardarelli.
Welcome back, gamers. I'm your host, Nick Cardarelli, and this is Raised on D&D. My next guest is from St. Louis, Missouri. He's the host of DiceGeeks Podcast and the author of the Book of Random Tables, the Great Book of Random Tables, Dungeons, and 20 additional books to assist game masters. He's currently working on Book of Random Tables Steampunk and Book of Random Tables Ancient World. Please welcome Matt Davids. Hi, Matt.
Hey, Nick. Thank you so much for having me on.
Matt, I got to tell you, I'm a big fan of your Books of Random Tables. I was running a Call of Cthulhu game for my children, and, we were taking it back to the 1920s, 1930s era, the original Call of Cthulhu setting. And I did go ahead and I picked up your Book of Random Tables for that genre, and it was so helpful. And so I'm a big fan. Matt, before we jump into your books, though, we want to kind of get to know you more as a gamer. Can you take us back to your first experience with Dungeons and Dragons or tabletop role-playing games?
Sure. First, thank you so much for buying my book and listening to my podcast. That's awesome. The first time I played Dungeons and Dragons, I think, at least I say this, I think it was 1982. I was 9 years old, and a friend of my brother's, but I have an older brother, his friend called and said, "Hey, we're going to play the greatest game in the world." And so we went over there and we played this game. My mind was blown. There was dice with all these different sides on them. I had never seen anything other than a 6-sided die or anything like that. I was immediately hooked, just instantly. This is what I had been waiting for my whole 9 years of existence.
Well, when someone tells you we're going to play the greatest game, it's kind of hard to turn that down.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
There you are, 9 years old. You're with your older brother, his friend, and you're playing the game, and it blows you away. How do you transition from playing the game to running the game? When do you finally get behind the screen?
Well, I went home and I started immediately drawing dungeons on paper. I didn't have graph paper. I just started drawing dungeons. I made dice from pieces of paper that I put in a little bag so I could pull out 20 pieces of paper because I didn't have any dice. And the very next day, I ran my mom through a dungeon.
Wow, that's fantastic. So you jump right in and you're like, I can do this. I want to do this. I'm going to get behind the screen. Now, you're sitting down with your mom in the 1980s, and how does she react to her first dungeon crawl in Dungeons and Dragons?
If I remember right, she was kind of confused by it, but she was humoring me because, I'm her baby, right? So, if I'm remembering right, she was very confused, but I, of course, didn't really know any of the rules or anything, right? So I had her make a character. I'm doing quotes around make a character, right? So I had her make some kind of character, and I don't think she knew what she was doing. But then I basically just told her, roll whatever on the 20-sided die. But of course, I didn't have a die. I had a bag full of paper with 1 through 20 on them. And so I had her draw out numbers to do different things. I just didn't even know what I was, just making everything up.
But you were so excited and ready to do it.
Yes.
You were like, I gotta try this out. I've got to make it happen.
Yeah.
How does your hobby progress moving forward into junior high, high school, college? Do you start to find a regular group? Do you start going to conventions? How does it all go down?
Yeah, well, from there, we did play some more with like my older brother and his friend's younger brother, who was a little bit older than me. We played a few times. My brother's friend ran us through quite a few dungeons and things, usually with some DM PC who then takes all of our good treasure from us, kind of classic, 1980s stuff. But yeah, from there, we did a lot of stuff. Actually, that same friend, he made a Star Wars game, long before he had made his own system, and we played that a lot. It was just a homebrew Star Wars system, and we did a lot of crazy stuff, blowing up the cantina and stuff. And then, it just really quickly, blossomed from there. I picked up, Marvel Superheroes, the TSR Marvel Superheroes. I picked that up. That was actually an incredible game because being like 10, 11 years old, I could read the whole thing, understand the rules. It was just made for, kids, and I could really just understand it all. And so I played that a lot with some friends. That's really where I ended up GMing quite a bit by actually like following rules and stuff like this. Of course, I had started also in third grade. A friend of mine, I don't know, his dad must have been into D&D in the 70s or something, because his dad just bought him all the books. So this friend of mine in like third, fourth, and fifth and sixth grade, he just had every book of Dungeons and Dragons. So, and like, it blew my mind because they were so expensive for me when, I was that age.
Absolutely. Those are the best kind of friends to have, is the ones with all the books.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. So we messed around. We just made characters all the time and stuff like that. And I think we tried playing, but again, we just looked at pictures and made up rules for stuff. And then I picked up Star Frontiers. I've told this story before on my podcast. I read Star Frontiers like maybe 3 or 4 years ago. I pulled out the book and read the rules. I never played a single rule, an actual rule of that game. Like, I just don't even know what we were doing. So I played that with another friend because we like sci-fi stuff. Then let's see, I got Fast Star Trek. So as you can see, it just started kind of going all over, so I got Fast Star Trek, did some of that. And then the big kind of watershed moment was West End Star Wars. That I picked that up in it was the first edition, 1987. As soon as I saw it on the shelf in the gaming store, I think I have a memory of, I was looking at some FASA supplements, and I was looking at some, Car Wars. I totally forgot about Car Wars. I played Car Wars a lot, even though that wasn't kind of a role-playing game as much as a kind of a board game. But I remember I was in the store and I'm looking at some other things, and I see Star Wars, the West End game book, sitting there, and I literally just jumped and grabbed it before anybody else could grab it. Of course, I'm alone in the whole section, right? There's nobody there, but I had to like just jump and grab it. So yeah, then that game, I just started playing that like crazy. What was awesome about that is, at the time, if people remember kind of the late 80s and early 90s, D&D was fairly complex. The books were expensive, had some cultural baggage here and there, to put it nicely, I guess. But Star Wars, right? The West End Star Wars game, it's D6, so you have dice laying around. The rules, I could show you how to play the rule. It's like 15 minutes. It takes 15 minutes to make a character. So in a half an hour, we're playing a game, and all my friends had seen Star Wars a million times. So we didn't have to talk about the world. We didn't have to do anything like that. So that started me on Star Wars West End, just playing that for years and years and years.
That is fantastic. My daughter, she asked me, she said, my friends are all Star Wars fans. If we could run a Star Wars RPG instead of a swords and sorcery setting, I think that they would be down for it more. And so I wrote up an adventure, and I tried to pull from the expanded universe, and I tried to pull from movies and comic books that I read, things like that. And I meshed it all together. But what was so funny was when we sat down, there was, I want to say there was 6 of them, including my daughter. They said, now, who here has played any games like Dungeons and Dragons? And all these hands started going up. My daughter had felt like, oh, this is a nerdy thing that me and my family do. My friends will be cool with the Star Wars thing, but they'll not had any experience with role-playing games. And all these hands start going up, and she starts looking around like, I had no idea. And so the game was amazing. It went off really well. Fast forwarding, Absolutely. You're a husband and a father. Is your wife a gamer also? Does she like role-playing games?
Yeah, she does. And I did forget to mention I played the Palladium games, Superheroes Unlimited, a whole bunch of other games in that. But yes, my wife enjoys role-playing, and it actually ties into our origin story, if you will, a little bit. I had introduced a friend years ago to Star Wars and to role-playing games. He had never played before. I had introduced him to role-playing games, and then him and his wife had actually gone to college with my future wife, and we kind of started showing up at events at their house, and then we started playing some. We played some Star Wars, we played some Star Trek, we played some D&D, and things just kind of went from there.
Wow, that is fantastic. You're coming over for game night at your buddy's house who you introduced to gaming. Now, are you the dungeon master still? Are you the forever DM behind the screen? Or is your buddy running the game at this point?
Well, usually for Star Wars, I would be running games. A few times he was actually running the Star Trek game, and then when we started playing D&D again, another friend ran us through some sessions of 4E, and then the first couple times I played 5E, I actually got to be a player, but I do end up being the game master a lot, and decades ago, it was not by choice. I pretty much had to be the game master if I wanted to play. But nowadays, I usually get the choice. If I want to run something, I can choose, and I can also have the option of jumping into some of my friends' games because they all want to run games now too.
And that's fantastic to have a group of dungeon masters that you can round robin, and you're not you're not stuck, and you avoid that burnout. But at the same time, the best thing about being a game master or dungeon master is whenever you want to role play, there you are. You just need people, and boom, you've got a game going. So that's great. You guys meet at the game table, fall in love, get married, and now you have children of your own. How many children do you have, Matt?
We have 4 children right now. Their ages are...
Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. Everybody goes crazy when I say their ages because they are 6, 4, 2, and 2 months.
Wow. Well, congratulations on the latest edition. And that is fantastic. Little stair steps. I'm in the same boat with you. Mine are 17 months apart, but I'm a little bit ahead. Mine is 15, just got her driver's license or learner's permit today, and got her first job just a couple of months ago. So that's wow. I feel old. And then I've got the 13-year-old who's about to turn 14, and then I've got the 12-year-old about to turn 13 this year. So they're right back to back, and so that crazy time period that you're going through right now, I totally get it. I've been there. But it's so wonderful. I miss them being little cuddle monsters. I can tell you that. But it goes by fast. So enjoy those early days. And well, you're going to get plenty of time because you're not getting any sleep. Is that right, Matt?
No, actually, this baby is amazing. She is our only girl, so she's actually really awesome. So
that's fantastic.
Yeah. And I'm pretty used to this point of getting up at certain times and things and dealing with stuff. So it's just
you've been conditioned over these years to do that.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. I've had almost 7 years of going through some of this stuff. So yeah.
Expert level at this point. So fantastic. So they're young, they're just starting out, and you have started to introduce them to tabletop role-playing games. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think even when my oldest was really young, since I started doing all of this stuff with DiceGeeks, and of course I play a lot, he started coming up with phrases like make a character and things like this when he was even like 3 years old and stuff. And so my first kind of introduction was when my oldest was 3, and I kind of sat him down. Like, I had heard him mention some of these role-playing game terms that I guess I just use around the house quite a bit. And so I asked him, okay, well, let's make you a character. And so I just asked him some kind of leading questions and say, what would you call him? And I think he said his name was Efo. And then I asked him a few other questions, and like what would he do, or what would he carry with him? And he said some things like cookies, and I think he said pepper, and books. He said he was going to carry some books with him, and some different things like that. And then of course I asked him, well, how would he defend himself or something? He said he had a lightsaber, of course. So we kind of went through that. But then just a few months ago, actually, kind of borrowing from your suggestion, I went ahead and bought Amazing Tales, and my wife and I, we sat down because we needed to help, but we sat down with our 3 boys. And so the 6, 4, and 2-year-old. So we sat down with them, and I went ahead and ran Amazing Tales. So we had them make characters, and the oldest said his character's name was Bjarn. Like Bjorn, but Bjarn. That's what he said. And then the 4-year-old said his name was Lightning. And then our 2-year-old, we asked him, we were like, what's your character's name? And he kind of does this thing where he goes, and he looks off, and then all of a sudden he yells Star Wars. So we named his character Star Wars. So that's kind of, right where we began with that whole thing.
Well, that's fantastic. And, between our conversation when I was a guest on your show on DiceGeeks Podcast, which, by the way, thank you so much for having me on. I forced my children to listen to it. My youngest loved it. And the other 2 went, thank you, Dad, for saying all those nice things. they're you got to understand, they're teenagers, they're angsty. So
we hear you talk enough, Dad, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so we had that, so we listened to the show, and it was phenomenal, and it was such a pleasure being on your show. Back that we were talking about Amazing Tales being that rules light, geared for younger gamers. How did you present this to your wife? Did you guys talk about it, then get the game? Did you say, hey, I got this new game, want to try it? Or did you just surprise her by having her sit down at the table with the boys? How did that transpire?
I think I think I just said, I heard about this game, and I had seen it before, but I hadn't really looked into it because I had seen it on DriveThruRPG, but I hadn't really looked into it. And I was like, a guest on my podcast said this was really, really good game. So she was just like, okay, since she enjoys playing, she was just totally fine with it. So I picked it up, and then I think it was the day we got it. I opened up the Amazon box or whatever, and I think the boys, they always want to see what I'm buying or whatever. So they came over and they were like, "What is this?" And I was like, "Well, it's a game for you guys." And I think it was just just right then they were like, well, let's play. So I think we just kind of sat, if I'm remembering right, we just sat down right then, and my wife came over and we just got paper and started making characters.
And what did you guys end up ordering, by the way? Did you get the original Amazing Tales? Did you get the big book of Amazing Tales? What did you end up getting?
I think I got the original one.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it was just the original one. Yeah.
So can you tell us about that first session with the children, how that went? Just, what you think their first impressions of it was, that sort of thing.
Yeah. I mean, their first impressions, they loved it instantly. They've been asking me to play again. And actually, I told them I was going to talk about it on your show today, just like a couple days ago. And they were like, can we play? Can we play right now? And I was just like, okay, well, not right now, but maybe over the weekend or something, we can check it out again. So yeah, they loved it and they really want to play. I just think there's just something with, I don't know if it's all kids, but certainly there's just something about the imagination and being able to tell stories and being able to do something as a character, as a within the story, and they love books. We read to them all the time. My wife reads to them at least an hour or more a night, and they love books, they love stories. So they were just right into it. I just did something very simple, like you're guarding a caravan kind of thing, through the woods, and they just got it. They just got it, and they just went with it. And yeah, I mean, we had a ton of fun. Now we didn't play for very long. We played for maybe a half hour or 45 minutes at most. So we just kind of kept it short and played, and they loved it.
That's fantastic. And just that little bit of introduction. You don't have to have that full 4-hour session like you do with teens or adults. You got the half an hour, 45 minutes in, and they obviously fell in love with it because they're begging for more and more and more. I know that Martin Lloyd, the creator of Amazing Tales, he's got he's had a Kickstarter going. He's taking it to the next level with a new book. And so as the kids get older, there'll be another version of Amazing Tales that will be suitable for older kids. So it's fantastic. I'm so glad you guys were able to discover that game, and I'm so glad that the family enjoyed gaming together like that. Matt, your books have been so helpful to so many dungeon masters. Having those tables and sources all together, amazing stuff. So can you tell us a little bit about it? How did you go from gamer dad to published author? How did you make that transition?
Well, the transition to being an author started in 2014, and you said maybe not to get too heavy on it, but a friend of mine actually passed away.
Sorry.
No, that's all right. And when I was at his funeral, I was seeing people that I hadn't seen in, 15, 20, maybe 30 years. I'm going to date myself. I always give away my age on all the podcasts. But, I was seeing people that I hadn't, seen in a long time. And a lot of my older friends, some of the circles that I had when I was a teenager in my early 20s, which this friend had belonged to, we had all played a game that I had made called Anarchy. I had made a post-apocalyptic game because we all wanted to be Mad Max. When we get into our teens and to our early 20s, we want to be Mad Max. So I had made up this game, and we had all played, including my friend who passed away. And my friend who passed away, he had been like my most prolific playtester. He was just like always there playing. We were hanging out a ton during that time. And so my other friends, were like, did you ever do anything with that? And I'm like, are you kidding me? Like I've gone on and had to put food on the table and
That's
all
right.
kinds of, things like that. It's like, I think the last time I looked at it might be like, 1998 or something, or something, who even knows? And so, we were talking, but, we kind of had like, almost like an hour drive back from the funeral kind of thing. And I was, driving home and thinking and talking to my wife. And I was just like, you know what, maybe I should just publish, write up the game, Anarchy, publish it. I'll be able to write my friend's name. I'll be able to write his name in there and say dedicated to, and I'll just publish that. And that'll kind of fulfill a dream I had when I was 18, and it'll honor my friends. So, so I started trying to do that. I went in and I pulled out some computer files, old things. I found some old folders with my papers and drawings in them. And I realized it was a total mess and that nobody could ever play this, and I was basically just making up the whole system in my head and never bother writing any, hardly anything down. So I started looking on how I could do that. So I know the West End Star Wars system really well. So that's, we've already talked about that. So they have released, when that company kind of went out of business, they released the system as the OpenD6 system. Mm-hmm. And that is free to use under the OGL, the Open Game License. So I just grabbed that system, converted my game over to that. It took like a year, and I went ahead and published it. And I kind of, at that moment, something, clicked inside of me, and I was like, oh, right. Since that first day when I was 9 years old and played Dungeons and Dragons, I have wanted to create role-playing games. And so, I started looking into things. I learned about DriveThruRPG and how you can publish on that platform and Amazon. And I just started thinking of things that were just rolling around in my mind, things I wanted to run, and I started publishing things. But the first thing, though, it wasn't the first thing, but one of the things that came to my mind was random tables, because all my years of running the Star Wars game, they didn't have many random tables. And I was always, telling some friends who hadn't played Dungeons and Dragons, in the 80s, I was telling them, hey, back in the 80s, Dungeons and Dragons had all these really cool random tables. And if you just went into a room, you could just roll on that table and find, something cool in there. But Star Wars didn't have that. The fastest Star Trek didn't have that. Some of the other games we were playing, they just didn't have those. Some of the Palladium games, the superhero games we were playing kind of in the late 90s and early 2000s, they didn't have those. So I would make up some of those on my own, back when I was running games. So, I would make those up when I had a lot more time on my hands. I would make those up. So, when I started putting out, and publishing game material, I was like, I bet you people would like random tables. And so I released a few, and, I was starting to get into, D&D 5e at this point and things like that. And so I just started putting together a few tables, and then I gathered up some of my tables, put them all together in the book, and I called it the Book of Random Tables, and I put that out, and that book kind of changed everything because it hit.
Well, and I'm going to tell you personally, it hit with me because as a dungeon master and sometimes the forever DM, immersion in the setting is so important to me. So I do a lot of research prior to, and I have to look up what kind of items or the costs of things. I just recently ran a Western game. So not only did I have to find books that had that information, and I had to spend time on the internet. And I say had to, but we're dungeon masters. We love that kind of stuff. But at the same time, your Book of Random Tables cuts that prep time down so much. When I was going to run Call of Cthulhu last Halloween for my family, I went ahead and I picked up the random tables, the Book of Random Tables, 1920s, 1930s, and off of DriveThru, downloaded the PDF, and I loved it. There were tables for names, for items, for important people of that time period, including world leaders and the kind of jobs you could have, media, songs. Your book helped me because I love, like I said, I love the immersion. I like the ambiance. So if I'm going to run a game, I want there to be sound effects. I want there to be background noise. I want there to be music. When they walked into a speakeasy during the investigation, I was able to play music that was actually on the radio. Now, of course, your book didn't have the music, but it had the list of songs, and I was able to go to YouTube and find those songs. And then the slang. I can't tell you as a dungeon master that if you're doing a period piece like a Western or 1920, the Roaring 20s, the Depression 30s, I might know one or two slang words from maybe movies I've seen, but having your random table of slang words from that period was incredibly helpful. Make the NPCs come to life and to make my players feel like they were actually interacting with people from that setting or that genre. Your books are incredible, and for dungeon masters, they are invaluable in time saving, but also if you're playing with a group that loves immersion. And I think that when you're playing with children, especially, they want that. They want to feel like they're part of a story. They're in a movie. They're part of the setting. The more the dungeon master performs the setting, describes it, and the NPCs give a voice to it, I think it makes it more comfortable for players, young and adults, to give into that disbelief, to give into that immersion, and then start using their own character voices and things like that. So, Matt, I just want to take a moment here as a fan to thank you for your books and thank you for your work and your contribution to the gaming community.
Oh, well, thank you, Nick. I mean, I am humbled by that praise, because that was some of the things you mentioned there were. It was kind of my exact thought process because, when I was 17, sure, I could sit in my room and jot down ideas while I'm watching TNG or whatever I was watching, back then, and, just jot down a whole bunch of ideas for my session that's coming up in a few days or whatever. But, as we get older and we have families and we have responsibilities, we do things, outside, work and community and, I mean, when are we going to have time to do some of these things? But when we run a game, we still want to do the best we can. And we want to, like you said, have that immersion in there. So that's what random tables do for me, because some of the killers I think that I experienced as a GM or DM is, when the players go into a room, and of course, they want to search the thing, right? If you're in a dungeon, they want to search the room. If you're on a spaceship, they want to search the room. It doesn't matter. They want to search the room. So when, a player asks me to search the room, number one, I don't want to say you don't find anything, because that just kills the whole session, right? I mean, that just kills the kind of the mood. The players get then into a habit. Then they don't search the room, and you're like, well, you didn't search the room and I had the key there that you needed. So, you want to kind of keep them coming back for more. And there's nothing, I have yet to find a better tool than that, is if you walk into a room and the players know that I have, maybe 10 1D100 tables, full of different items that they could find in that room, even if they are, a rotten piece of wood to 2 gold pieces to a dead rat, or a rusty nail. It doesn't matter to the players, because we're still in the game, we're still in that world, and we can still, have that immersion feeling. And I didn't have to spend, 3 hours putting those items in that room.
You make an excellent point when you talk about the kind of the training your players. If you don't have anything in the room, every time they say, we search the room, well, there's nothing here. There's this and that, but nothing useful. If that's your answer all the time because you didn't have the prep time, you don't have things prepared. Well, like you said, you're training your players not to search. And then when they finally get to that room where they need something, they're not going to search it. And so having those random tables, and you get the players excited because they're like, oh, Matt always has cool stuff in every room or most rooms, so we got to search. Even if it's not directly related to the story, it'll be something cool that we find. Yeah. And that's how you train your players to in the strategy of tabletop role-playing games, right? Every dungeon master wants their players to use teamwork. They want them to search. They want them to look for clues, that kind of thing. So I think that's a fantastic point and definitely helpful for the saving time. Mm-hmm. Now, you've got a couple of books that you're working on now. We've got Steampunk coming up and Ancient Worlds. So now these are going to be two more books with random tables. I know you can't tell us too much about it, but what can we expect from Steampunk and Ancient Worlds?
Yeah, well, the steampunk, obviously picking up on kind of the Victorian era and some items and things you might find in rooms or in places. And then I've also followed kind of the same idea with the Book of Random Tables, 1920s and 1930s. It put some time period specific things in there. So they'll be right at your fingertips, so you don't have to, go all over the place to try to find some of those. So some really fun stuff in steampunk. Of course, I make up tables. Usually in each of the books, I have something like adventure hooks or settings or encounters, and just drawing from my knowledge of, say, Jules Verne and some of that kind of classic literature. So I'm putting some of that in there. And then the Ancient World is some of the mythic gaming, kind of the Greek, some of the ancient, classical world like that. So I've kind of gone back and make sure I have names from some of those cultures, ancient Greece, ancient Sumerian, kind of working in some of those names so people would have those there. And then some items that are specific to the ancient world that you would not necessarily find in kind of a more medieval type fantasy. So amphora and things like that, and the things that olive oil, stuff that maybe a D&D world doesn't think about. So I'm putting kind of those things into those books. Yeah.
Well, that's phenomenal, and we're looking forward to that quite a bit. My children are big fans of Greek mythology. They grew up read the stories. As they got older, they read the Odyssey and the story of Odysseus and his journey across the sea. And one of the real quick, a funny story about that. My middle child read kind of an abridged version of the Odyssey a couple of years back. And he says, wow, this book is really good. He's like, oh, I really like this character, Odysseus, and all the situations he gets into. And he says to me, hey, how old is this book? And I said, the one you're holding? And he goes, no, the story. When was it written? And I said, 3,000 years ago. And he went, he's 11 years old, and he's expecting me to tell him, 20 years ago, it was
1957.
To an 11-year-old, right? 1957 to an 11-year-old. What's the difference between exactly. 1980 and 1945? But when I said 3,000 years ago, he just what? And he goes, but it's so fresh, and it's so new, and it's so relatable. And I said, that's because it's a story, and well, it's a story about people, and 3,000 years, we still go through the same kinds of drama and the same kind of problems, and we still react the same way. I said, and that's why you're able to relate to King Odysseus and in the Odyssey, and what an amazing aha moment for him to realize that story is so important to us as human beings, and how stories can be timeless. Now, not every Dungeons and Dragons session is going to be the Odyssey, but it's all part of that tradition of oral storytelling that we're passing on to our children, and that's incredible. Matt, thank you again. Thank you for being on the show, and I hope to have you back on again.
All right. Well, thanks, Nick. It was just a pleasure to be on your show. Thank you so much for the invitation, and just thanks a ton, man.